Hello there, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, oil, how to get it and how to keep it safe. We're going to take you to India, where oil and gas fields have gone under the hammer as the country tries to cut dependence on imports. The problem is, it hasn't gone too well. Russia's first recession in a decade hits the country's biggest truck maker and wrecks a local community. And swine flu, the pharmaceutical industry has the vaccine, and the profits, well, they just keep rolling in. But we're going to talk oil first up this week, and in a place you'd possibly not expect, India. While most of the focus in Asia is on China's thirst for oil, second only to the United States it is, neighbouring India also needs oil and gas, and lots of it, to power its economic growth. And the thing is, India's got oil, it just needs to get access to it. I'm going to tell you more about that in a moment. First, just have a look at these numbers and you'll see why oil and India have a lot in common. This is from the US Energy Information Administration, which says India is the world's fourth biggest consumer of oil, almost 3 million barrels per day. It is the world's sixth largest importer of oil. That means it has to ship in about 75% of its annual needs. Even the US at number 1, China at 3 only have to get in half of what they need. No surprise then that the Indian government would like to reduce that dependence on those 75% imports. And as we said before, it can do that. India has 5.6 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, which is the second largest in the Asia-Pacific region. Admittedly, that is just a drop in the ocean compared to the oil-producing giants like Saudi Arabia and Canada. But it is there, and as such, India is in the process of auctioning off some 80 oil and gas blocks. So it needs the know-how, the expertise in drilling for that oil, because much of it is offshore and difficult to extract from the ground. So you'd think, wouldn't you, the international oil giants like BP, Shell, Exxon, they'd be racing to take part. Apparently not. Prerna Suri reports from India.
In a country where the number of cars often outstrip the number of roads, the demand for oil is never-ending. In the Indian capital New Delhi, a staggering 900 million cars jostle for space, all running on some form of gas. Fueling this demand is an ever-burgeoning middle class and a growing economy which requires all the oil it can to power its growth.
Just to give an example of the demand for oil and gas here, petrol stations like these service hundreds of customers every day. But India still can't meet its own oil needs. It imports about 75% of its crude oil from overseas. And the government is quite keen to develop its existing oil reserves to meet this demand.
The country has 5.6 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the second largest in Asia-Pacific. And some 80 oil and gas blocks across India are still waiting to be explored. But the problem is that some of these are in areas which are hard to reach, and some require expensive technology to extract the gas out of coal seams. India is keen to hand these blocks to foreign players who may be able to do just that. But a recent auctioning of these areas by the government proved to be a failure, with only 50% of the bids being snapped up. Officials say the global economic crisis is to be blamed, along with the long-standing legal feud between the billionaire Ambani brothers.
I don't think.
But others like Deepak Mahukar say the reasons could be policy-related.
The primary reason for so-called failure in the NELP 8th round is seen as non-prospectivity perceived by the investors. There are many blocks in which there was a no-show. As far as above-the-ground risks are concerned, people may have perceived the business environment not to be right, including the economic meltdown which is seen in the last 18-20 months. Most importantly, I've heard many people say that the Ambani feud has had an effect on this round. I don't subscribe to that particular view.
With a heavy dependence on oil imports and not many domestic possibilities on the horizon, India's economy may find it difficult to speed ahead. Prerna Suri, Al Jazeera, New Delhi.
Joining us now from Washington, D.C. to talk more about this is Dr. Adhip Chaudhry. He is an economics professor at Georgetown University. Thank you for your time, sir. What happened in India, do you think, with these oil and gas auctions? There's a lot of oil and gas available, and it seems not a lot of interest.
Yes, there seems to be a fair amount of supply in the world, excess supply. So there is not much interest in exploration, especially in areas where the probability, the geological probabilities are not as high. There's a lot more interest in, say, offshore in Gulf of Mexico or Brazil than in India.
So looking more long-term, people aren't seemingly interested in the idea of a sort of a new frontier. I mean, India's not a place you'd usually think about oil and gas. You don't think there's enough interest there?
India herself would like to be thought of that way. The government of India would like foreign multinationals from the Western countries and also like Saudi Aramco, Petrobras and all to come to India. India would like to be thought that way, but I don't think the foreign companies are much interested at all.
So you're saying India needs the foreign companies more than the foreign companies need a new place to dig for oil, because India's got this huge growing economy to supply. It's having to import 75% of its demand.
That's true. The reason why India wants the foreign companies is not so much that they don't have the technological capabilities or even the capital resources, is because they feel like that the whole oil exploration and extraction business has become like joint ventures and alliances. On a typical block in Nigeria or a typical block in Guinea, you'll have companies from 4 or 5 different countries, sharing 20% each. So for the Indian companies, especially one called ONGC, to get into such alliances in Western Africa, in Latin America, there has to be a quid pro quo. Also with Western multinationals like Shell, that Shell would share with India elsewhere if Shell was allowed into India. So there is that strategic aspect to it.
Is it fair to say we would have seen a different result with a different oil price? I'm thinking back to about a year ago, 2008, oil was up at about $140 a barrel, and there were hundreds of bids for Indian oil blocks.
Right. That would of course be true. You know that ONGC, the Indian company, acquired a lot of oil fields and oil blocks. The rest of the world, the Chinese companies, Indian companies were, all over the world looking for oil. The $70 a barrel price, which is what OPEC likes, it's the price that Saudi Arabia likes. So OPEC basically promises all that the world wants at $70 a barrel. So the world is in a kind of a nice equilibrium right now. The future of oil actually doesn't look that good because of fairly fast-paced renewable energies happening in Europe, United States, and I also believe Japan, and then China. So the future of oil demand is going to be softer rather than stronger.
And on that point of renewable energy, just a final thought, is there interest in renewable energy in India? I mean, we're talking about oil here, obviously we're focusing on that. Is there anyone looking seriously at renewable energy in India?
Yes, they are, though right now it's a lot more talk than action. But there are big plans being announced for solar energy and wind energy, and there's a lot of decentralized, local level, village level projects utilizing solar energy rather than mammoth electricity projects. And you also know that nuclear energy has been approved, so India is going to utilize more of that. If you think of nuclear in the same way as solar and wind, which we shouldn't, but it is other than oil. Just one more word. In India, the real need for oil is not gasoline for cars and so on. The real need is for kerosene, which is used by hundreds and millions of poor people in the villages to light little stoves where they do their cooking. Okay, and that is the key demand for oil in India. Even though automobiles have been rising, the most important consumption of oil in India is kerosene for poor people.
Dr. Adhip Chowdhury there from Washington, D.C.'s Georgetown University. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
So, to give you a pretty simple progression, we've looked at getting the oil out the ground, attracting the expertise, coping with the demand. The thing we haven't considered yet is security. No use getting the oil if you can't keep it safe, right? Well, now attacks on oil pipelines from Nigeria to Iraq are not uncommon, and they are disrupting those vital supply lines. Nicole Johnston looks now at the issues surrounding oil security.
There are 3 major threats to oil and gas companies: terrorism, criminal activity and disenfranchised individuals that may work internally within an organisation.
Oil companies are under attack like never before.
The biggest choke point the security industry, petroleum industry faces from a security perspective is the Gulf of Aden and Somali piracy.
In November last year, an audacious attack. Brazen hijackers boarded a Saudi Aramco oil tanker with $100 million of crude on board. The pirates demanded a $25 million ransom. 2 months later, the ship was set free. But what it demonstrated was the pirates' widening net from Somalia to the waters off Kenya. If a massive Saudi oil tanker isn't safe from piracy, then perhaps no one is. This week in Qatar, oil companies and security experts met to discuss these threats, and one of the conference sessions was simply called piracy.
Let's not forget that less than 0.5% of ships are actually attacked that transit the Gulf of Aden. There has been some progress made by a lot of multinational corporations in terms of trying to deter pirates. And look, these pirates are smart. This is a business, and they're smart about how they run their business.
Smart indeed. They're getting plenty of practice. There's been at least 34 hijackings this year, mostly in Somalia, and over 300 ships have been attacked. To try and combat it, more than 30 ships and aircraft from 16 nations are now patrolling the Gulf of Aden. A strong show, but not enough to police the entire area.
Security was not the issue here, 10 years ago, shall I say. But now, since it's becoming, essential to protect the national assets, therefore it was very important, essential for all forces to come together and look at this investment as a national asset rather than a private, company which were producing the oil. So therefore we had to integrate with each other.
The pirates' business has hit the shipping business, with insurance premiums rising. Maersk, the world's largest shipping company, is now taking its oil tankers around the Cape of Good Hope instead of the Gulf of Aden shortcut. In Nigeria, oil rebels of another kind. The movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta, or MEND. For years, they've fought against the oil industry, calling for a greater distribution of wealth in a country resource-rich, while its people are dirt poor. Their campaign has cost Nigeria $36 billion in lost production. But this hasn't deterred the Chinese, who are looking to secure a stake in Nigeria's oil reserves.
We'd welcome more input from the Koreans and the Chinese and the Japanese oil and gas companies, petroleum companies. They are operating more upstream. The Koreans are very active in Kurdistan and Yemen, the Chinese throughout Africa, Japanese, southern Iraq.
The threats are significant. The cost to business runs into the billions. Pirates and militants, oil companies want them stopped. These rebels say the exploitation of resources has forced them to fight. But from behind bars, no one is listening. Nicole Johnston for Counting the Cost.
And Counting the Cost returns in a moment with more from around the business world, including this town in Russia. It is home to the country's biggest truck plant. So why are so many searching elsewhere for jobs? That and plenty more in a moment.